People talk about willpower when it comes to food, but you're testing that willpower all day, every day. And at some point, you'll give in. I mean, that's kind of inevitable. And if you have to go through the supermarket and constantly resist, there's only so much resisting a person can do.
Welcome to another episode of the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. My name is Eamon Keogh. Safefood launched its new public health campaign, #TalkAboutFood, which is aimed at building a healthier food environment and protecting children's health. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Aileen McGloin, Director of Nutrition with Safefood, and Nora Campbell, Associate Professor in Marketing, Trinity College Dublin. You're both very welcome.
Thank you, Eamon.
Thank you.
Aileen, coming to you. Firstly, congratulations on the new campaign. It looks great.
Thank you.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, really, can you explain what the purpose of the campaign is?
What we really want at this point is to raise awareness of the food environment. When we did our baseline research and preparing for the campaign, only 1 in 4 people had ever heard of it. And maybe for your listeners, I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by food environment. You know, if you picture a typical day for a parent, they might have, not enough fruit in the house for the kids' lunches. So off they go to the corner shop. And not only can they not find the fruit in the corner shop, they're bombarded with offers for special offers for the crisps when they walk in the door. So they buy those. Then they arrive at work and in the canteen, it's just as cheap to buy a coffee and a muffin as it is to just buy the coffee. So they're tempted by that as well. Yeah. The same thing at lunch, when they have the offer of the fizzy drink and the crisps along with the sandwich for the same cost as the sandwich. And then if they want to be a bit more organised the next day, they'll go to the supermarket. But actually, they're 16 times more likely to see an unhealthy food in a prominent place in the supermarket than a healthy food. And in the supermarket, 35% of the offers will be on unhealthy food. So, you could go on and on and on about the touch points on a daily life. But, what I'm painting a picture of is the fact that we're bombarded by unhealthy food at every turn in the day.
Yeah. And obviously, what you've described there, this campaign is coming from a strong evidence base. But just to that point, I saw in one of your briefing notes that food-related ill health is now the biggest cause of preventable illness and death in the developed world, far greater than smoking. That's really stark.
It is. And, in Ireland, 60% of the adult population are living with overweight and obesity, and it's 1 in 5 children. And if you live in a deprived area, it's 1 in 3 children. Yeah. And I suppose the biggest tragedy of all of that is that this is preventable, and for kids in the immediate term, they will have mental and social health detrimental effects. And, later it's higher risk of heart disease, cancer and type 2 diabetes, as well as disability. So, this is one of the most important public health issues of our time. Yeah. And, our opportunity to be healthy, i.e. the foods that are available for us, is a huge part of that.
Yeah. And sometimes maybe the cynics among us might go, oh, is it really that important, or is it such a public health issue? But one of the other stats, and you've lots of great stats and it's very interesting reading, but just 8 of the top 10 selling brands in Ireland are unhealthy foods and fizzy drinks. That's unbelievable as well.
It is. I'm thinking that's probably not a surprise to anybody. And, those companies, we're talking about chocolate, crisps, fizzy drinks here. I think everybody could name them very easily themselves. Those companies in 2023 spent 9 million on advertising, and there's a reason why they do that. It works. So we know that children see about 1,000 ads for unhealthy food every year. We know from previous Safefood research that before a child leaves preschool, that they can recognize the brands and logos of unhealthy food. And we're doing a piece of research now on digital devices and exposure of children to unhealthy foods. So we'll know a lot more about this, later this year and early into next year. But I suppose, no matter where children go, they are exposed and unprotected, if you like. Yeah. And as part of this campaign, we'd love to see more protection, more protected spaces, whether it's their phone, the places where children gather, when they go into leisure centres, swimming pools, play areas for small kids, it's always an abundance of unhealthy food, no matter where they go. And that has to end.
Yeah. Nora, just coming to you, as we know, the positioning of products in the supermarket aisles or in other shops, it doesn't happen by accident. All these things are really measured and well thought out by the supermarkets.
I think research shows that supermarkets, forecourts, convenience shops are the most curated spaces in Ireland. So every single square inch of that space has been designed to increase consumption and move from what is known as list shopping to on-plan shopping. So when you look at supermarket trade magazines, grocery store, convenience store trade magazines, everything is about building a strategy that moves from list shopping to on-plan shopping. So a couple of weeks ago, Eamon, I went to my local supermarket on the 22nd of May. So it's a real true story.
Yeah.
And because I do research in supermarkets and on supermarkets, and I took photographs of a very well-known energy drink, Monster energy drink, that many of you will know. And I wonder if you can guess how many times it was placed around a single supermarket.
Maybe 5, 6 times?
Yes,
Is
5
it?
times.
Wow.
5 times. So it was available in the soft drinks aisle, in the deli fridge,
Yeah.
at point of sale, so in the mini cooler beside the checkout, and at 2 end cap displays. So end cap displays are those shelves that are at the very bottom of a supermarket aisle, where you go around the corner and you've been shopping for nappies and you suddenly turn around the corner and you see, you know, Monster energy drink or an energy drink. So end cap displays are designed to create what's known as a disjunctive experience. That's what it's called in supermarket industry magazines. So that you turn around an aisle and you say, why is this here? I was just, you know, shopping for cereal and suddenly I'm shopping for an energy drink. And when you put a very unhealthy product at 5 different locations around a supermarket, what that does is decrease resistance to purchase and increase propensity to purchase. One of the biggest strategies within supermarkets and convenience stores is to stimulate in-store travel. So success is measured in the number of footsteps or the number of meters you get any individual customer to travel. And those are one of the success metrics. So putting milk at the bottom left-hand corner of a store would increase the success metric of that multiple or that convenience store.
Right. Wow. So it really is nearly a science or an art.
It is.
And also just, I suppose we're talking about supermarkets, but when you look at, you mentioned hardware stores earlier or petrol stations, or it's really everywhere, isn't it? I mean, I know when I go in to pay for petrol and it's nearly like queuing for your passport, really, the way you have to go up and down and you're passing all these streets and everything, and having the kids with me and they're looking and they're picking up. I mean, I think one day I counted my 10-year-old, I think 6 or 7 times she picked up a treat to say, can I have this? Can I have that? I mean, that's a lot of stress as well on parents to say, no. It's nearly like eventually you'll give in.
Yeah, you're describing that kind of constant resilience that a parent needs to have. You know, people talk about willpower when it comes to food, but you're testing that willpower all day, every day. And at some point, you'll give in. I mean, that's kind of inevitable. And if you have to go through the supermarket, as Nora described, and constantly resist, you know, there's only so much resisting a person can do. You know, we don't have an endless bucket of willpower that's, that can be tested at all times and every day.
Yeah. And another stat I read that the public feel responsible for food-related ill health in children. More than 6 in 10 adults, I think, believe they're mainly responsible for food-related ill health in children, which is far ahead of where they feel the food manufacturers or food retailers' responsibility lies.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, Eamon. I would think it was 9% that were able to mention food manufacturer, and as you say, 62% said parents were to blame.
Yeah.
So we want to reverse that entirely. You know, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, organizations like Safefood and like the HSE, you know, for the last 20 years, we've been working to encourage people to change their eating behavior. And people listening may be familiar with the COMBI model. That means that, you know, we divide behavior change into capability, opportunity, and motivation. And all those 3 elements, you know, are needed if, you know, if someone wants to change their behavior. So, you know, we've been trying to help people with their capability. We've been, you know, increasing people's knowledge and skills. We've been trying to change their motivation by highlighting either consequences or benefits. We've appealed to people's valued identities. And we've tried all of these things, but in the absence of trying to highlight the opportunity part of that or change the opportunity part of that.
Yeah.
I think we've all realized collectively that, we won't succeed, that it's impossible to ask someone to change their eating behavior in an environment that simply doesn't support that.
Yeah.
And that is really where this campaign comes in. So, as I said, people haven't been aware. So when we were doing our research, our formative research for the campaign, there was this aha moment. People, at the beginning were saying, "Oh no, I'm responsible. I'm a parent." And but I as you did, trying to bring your 10-year-old through that snake of unhealthy food. But once you explain to them or kind of highlight to them this food environment that is so detrimental to good decision making, there's a real moment of, oh, I see. And I think that's an opportunity for a little bit more of an empathetic conversation, less blame. Parents are not to blame. And I think that's a really important part of the messaging that we want to get across in this campaign.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to just the wider environment, because we talked about supermarkets, and we talked about, I suppose, one channel, but I mean, social media as well. I mean, as you were saying, kids watching television or online, they see those ads and that's having a reinforcement effect on them as well, isn't it, Nora?
That's right. So it is the physical environment and it's the digital environment as well. And what the Safe Food campaign is attempting to do is to say that, if obesity, overweight, ill health is a flood, we don't tell people, we'll teach you how to swim better within the flood. We have to lower the water. So a big part of research across Europe and policymaking across Europe today, right now, is to think of ways in which we can lower the water level for people. And Eamon, you're right, that lowering of the water level, where does that water come from? And it's not just, the retail environment. In order to kind of drive profits, corporates, multinationals, transnational food brands have to make sure that they hit what I call the 4 golden hallmarks of success. So the food has to be cheap. So it has to be designed in a way to ensure it's cheaper to buy, strawberry flavored sweets than it is to buy strawberries.
Right.
So, or we live in a country where it's cheaper to buy cheese flavored pizza than it is to buy cheese. The playing field is already structurally gamed against an individual consumer who wants to buy sweets or who wants to buy strawberries or wants to buy cheese.
Yeah.
It has to be convenient. So the food has to be delivered in a way that you can consume it really quickly. So you'll see a lot of packaging innovation around things like pouches, tubes, cylinders, share bags, this kind of thing. It has to be hyper palatable. So the food is engineered in a way to stimulate repeat consumption. So all of us have had this experience of you open a particular packet of crisps or you open a particular cylinder of crisps or biscuits and you start eating them. And it is almost impossible to feel that feeling of satiety, that kind of feeling of, oh, I've had enough of those particular type of crisps. And they're designed in a certain way to stimulate repeat consumption. And what you get then when you have junk food brands doing this is that other brands that used to be very healthy or in ostensibly really healthy categories like bread becomes cakeified. So you see the cakeification of particular bread brands going into brioche making or flapjack making. And so the whole consumer base that it knows this brand really well will move with it to brioches and mini croissants to put in the lunchbox. Or you see the crispification of vegetables. So the vegetables become kind of packaged and sold back as crisps, etc.
It's funny you say that because, actually I was doing the weekly shop yesterday and one thing, the bread, as you were saying, the sweet bread, etc. But actually then the cakes are all next to the bread nearly. So as you walk down, you get your bread and then all the buns and all the other iced treats are there.
That's probably the most powerful arsenal in the world of marketing and promotion. It's known as category management. And it's something we don't talk about at all. But basically everything that we categorize in our head when it comes to food is bivalent. It means it's either healthy or unhealthy. That's what everybody does, and they tip a balance. So if it's, broccoli and cheese bake, you're kind of going, is that healthy or unhealthy? And it goes into one or other of those categories. So category management in retail, in packaging, in advertising is trying to move an unhealthy product into a healthy category. So if we were to categorize nutritionally and scientifically this food, most of the breakfast cereals would be in the junk food aisle. Most of the yogurts would be, in the chocolate and dessert aisle. So the category management has a really significant impact on the decisions that we make, and it's completely out of our hands. It is the way in which the food environment is already structured, pre-structured before we make any individual decisions. So we might think, we have agency and we have autonomy, but it's already been decided at the level of, you can decide, for this health claim or that health claim or this flavor or that flavor. And it's a type of pseudo choice rather than any actual real choice.
Yeah. And actually, when I spoke to Professor Donald O'Shea in an earlier episode about childhood obesity, he talked about the cynical nature of how industry targets children in that respect. And he referred to the eye line being the byline. So that category piece of nearly that, depending on the eye level of the child or the age of the child, the product suits their palate nearly. So you're targeting a 5-year-old versus an 11-year-old.
Maybe the most cynical strategy of the last 20 years has been the creation of a type of eating time called the treat. So this has been a particular strategy that has straddled all food multinationals of it's just a little treat. So what you get is a rationalization of this food environment where wall to wall you have junk food, but then you are told, you can indulge your children in just a little treat. So individually it's entirely rational. I give my children treats all the time, just a little treat. But collectively it doesn't add up because you have, Haribo competing for just a little treat logic versus Cadbury Mondelez versus, Unilever. And so you get something that's individually rational for an organization or a food brand to say, but it's collectively insane. But we are asked to be almost in that position where you're having to accept the individual directive or instruction while also all of them, the clamour of it is so loud. So that's why we end up giving our children treats every day.
Nora is absolutely right. Treats are supposed to be treats, but more than 20% of the calories that a child eats on average, we know from our national databases, come from treat foods. And it's not just the advertising. This is actually now ingrained in our culture. So it's, your granny giving you a treat and your coach giving you a treat and your neighbour giving you a treat and your auntie giving you a treat. And, we're having a treat because it's the birthday and we're having a treat because it's Halloween. And the Halloween treats are in the shops by the end of August. So again, not only, through our retail environment and our advertising environment, but this has now become part of our culture and it's part of, how we show our care for our children, in fact, and it's cheap, we all want to show that we love and care for our children. But a treat, is something you can do immediately and cheaply. So no matter how much money in your pocket, you can always show love in this way. So, there's an extra layer of cynicism there when you think about it like that.
And you have brands that say snack mindfully, enjoy responsibly, be treat wise. And then the exact company, when you look at their annual shareholder report, will say, our goal is to accelerate consumer-centric growth. Our consumers are the reason we want to be the best snacking company in the world. We're focused on accelerating and increasing our focus on chocolate biscuits and baked snacks.
Wow,
so you get this kind of you get two ways of speaking by the organization. One is consumer facing and parent facing of mindful snacking. We're so responsible and we are investing in the community. And then there is a shareholder rhetoric that is much more hard-nosed and about accelerating and driving growth within these categories, and with very specific targets for each of the business units to do so. it's very difficult for us to just simply focus on the consumer-facing, community-facing, corporate social responsibility-facing face of the organisation. And unless we are looking at the economics of the organisation, we're not actually getting to any sort of truth about the food environment.
Yeah. And I think you can see, you mentioned it there about, it'll start again, I'm sure now in August, September, Halloween at first, and then Christmas, and then Easter. Like it's never ending, really, isn't it, in terms of promotions?
Yes, and we've all bought the Christmas chocolates in September, and then they haven't lasted anywhere near to December. But it's so tempting, it's so cheap and so tempting. And on one level, you're thinking, well, that makes sense, and I'm going to, start my budgeting for Christmas by buying a bit in advance. But it doesn't tend to work out that way. We're all human.
Yeah.
And what brands do is not just package and advertise, but branding is about the creation of time. So you get ones that we all know, like Halloween or Christmas, but there are the creation of profit times, like the back to school time, the after school time, the morning snack time. These are all time parcels that have been strategized around. You get everything from Arthur's Day to Cadbury's Friendship Day to World Nutella Day.
Yeah.
So that if you put all of these things into a calendar for 365 days a year, on multiple times in that day, there is an instruction to eat and to indulge and to have a special occasion. So as Aileen says, it's very difficult to go into a clothes shop, bookshop or leisure centre without having food in non-food spaces. But even at the level of things that are as important as our kind of concept of time changes, because every single hour, minute, day, week or season has been strategized around an occasion to eat.
Yeah. When you were talking there, I was thinking, thank God my children haven't heard of World Nutella Day. We're talking about all this, and we're talking about the blatant corporate messaging there to shareholders around this is how we're going to exploit consumers and drive that demand. Do you feel there's legislation needed, or is that where we're going in terms of regulating the food environment?
I think so, Eamon. As part of our work on this campaign, Safefood has a food environment forum, which is an all-island group made up of the 2 departments of health, Food Standards Agency in Northern Ireland, the Food Safety Authority here in Ireland, the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland, and the HSE and ourselves. And we've tried to identify key priorities for changing the food environment. And they range from, the microenvironments, really changing food on a very local level, which is part of some of the work the HSE is already doing. Food standards and nutrition standards in key settings. Everybody knows about school lunches and now the standards for the preschool sector.
Yeah.
But also as part of that, there's already legislation in England to control where food is placed. Nora talked about those prominent places, end of aisles and so on. And the pricing of unhealthy food, like buy one, get one free, those are going to be banned under the new legislation. We also need far greater strengthening of the restriction of advertising of unhealthy food to children. We have some through what was the BAI, the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland Code, and Commissioner Mann is now working on new legislation. So we would love to see a more prominent place for unhealthy food within that. And we also know, most of us have been working on this for a very long time. Yeah. And voluntary codes have tended not to work. So what really works internationally is by bringing in legislation to protect children. I think it's important to take a children's rights lens here. Children have a right to be protected. They have a right to survive and thrive. And only when we protect them in the context of the quality and type of food that they get can we ensure that that's the case. This is about something that is fundamental to the health of a child.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're having that conversation with your 15 or 20-year-old in years to come, it would be nice to say, well, actually, this was a watershed moment where we did something about this. Because it's very clear from what you're both describing, there's a problem. And when you look at the levels of childhood obesity and the trends, I think it's really important that it starts now.
Mm-hmm. And the pressure points that need to be pressed on to create change are much more upstream and structural rather than downstream and literacy building and behavioural change, where a lot of our research has developed around those pressure points of certain gatekeepers like teachers, parents, teenagers making responsible choices. And so the further upstream you move, the more difficult it is to create the change. But the more impact that change will have. So we can see, for example, there's going to soon be published a review of the sugar sweetened drinks tax that has fundamentally changed behaviour around sugar sweetened drinks. So taxation is really important, but also Eamon, subsidies are really important. So for example, many of your listeners will be very surprised to know that companies that advertise junk food online or in retail environments, they don't have to pay any tax on that advertising and promotion. So they get a tax write-off for advertising junk food to the population. So it's 100% tax deductible. So one of the things that we have to do is not just tax, but to also remove the subsidies that we are taking out of our pockets and giving to very powerful brands that are doing massive amounts of harm. And so my biggest ask would be around removing those subsidies, and not even taxation at this point, but stop giving them a helping hand when you see that at the population level, we're not actually helping our most vulnerable.
And just going back to the campaign, just to quote your chief executive, Gary Carney, this is a move away from personal responsibility towards a broader societal response. I mean, we've talked about the legislation. What else do you mean there by the societal response?
I mentioned some of the priorities that we'd identified as the Food Environment Forum. So, I suppose the mix of those types of measures and that upstream approach that Nora mentioned there, that's what I mean. I think for too long we've said, I am responsible for what I eat, but actually that's not the case. When you think about the food environment and how it's constructed and very purposefully constructed, people have very little control over the food that is made available to them, accessible to them and desirable to them. And I think if we were to kind of put ourselves forward maybe 30 years and to see what would a good food environment look like, our vision is that healthy food is within the reach of every child. I mean, that means that there are spaces in which children are protected, that the food that is offered and available to them and accessible, as in affordable to them, is healthy, primarily healthy, and that we have created legislation and structures to, protect not just children, us as adults as well, so that, food that is such a fundamental part of our health and our lives is enhancing, at a population level rather than detrimental, which is what it seems to be now.
Yeah. And Aileen, what would you like people to do as a result of this campaign?
Eamon, because this idea is so new, we know from our research that only 1 in 4 had ever heard of the food environment or really understood what it meant.
Yeah.
At this point, we just want people to look around and, really become more aware of it.
Yeah.
We would love them to have a conversation with their friends and family and ask questions like, what does my food environment look like? How did it come to be like this? What would a good food environment look like? Really, at this point, we just want people to become more aware, but ultimately we want the public's voice to join us as health professionals working to improve public health so that we can ultimately improve this food environment. A lot of the responsibility lies with the likes of Safefood, with the likes of the HSE, because we need that policy change. We need that legislation change. But actually, there's a voice here for the public. And I think that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, there will be an election coming up.
Absolutely.
And it's no harm to mention it to your local politician, I think, as well.
That's a really good piece of advice. I think most people in this country, because we've internalized the message of this is my own responsibility as a parent or as an individual to look after my food, what I decide to put into my mouth, they don't see that it's a bigger political and economic issue. So as a voter, and when people knock on your door, simply ask the question, what is your food policy? It's a really powerful question. You will put any political party on the back foot because they tend not to have very strong food policies, and wait and see what their answer is. But I would love everyone to start asking that question. What's the food policy here? And I think for HSE professionals, again, it's what Aileen says, this is a new area. Most people who are working in public health have understood and been trained in the biological vectors of disease and non-communicable disease. There's a new area now, it's the commercial vectors of disease. We know now that those commercial vectors are even stronger than biological vectors. Most of you who work in the HSE, I'm in a business school, will say, but I'm not an accountant and I'm not a marketer or an economist. And my advice is to, first of all, understand that we are going to have to work together to come up with new measurements and new metrics and new ways of understanding these commercial vectors. People working in the critical area of marketing or business can't do it on their own because we don't know the public health environment. And so I'm asking for a fusion of those ideas and maybe to read a report that came out last week, as well as the Safefood report, which is the WHO European Regional Report, which shows that nearly 7,500 deaths per day are attributable to 4 unhealthy commodity industries: the fossil fuel industry, alcohol, tobacco, and ultra-processed food industry. They are directly causing thousands of deaths every day of parents, of children, of people who have a right to not die prematurely. And that's not even discussing the misery of disability adjusted life years that people have to suffer as a consequence of these 4 unhealthy commodities. We can do better.
And Aileen, if somebody wants more information about the campaign, where should they go?
Our listeners could find it on safefood.net.
For the healthcare professionals listening, I mean, Nora talked about it there, but what message would you have for them?
I think healthcare professionals, can have a really important voice in this conversation, whether it's when they're speaking to their own patients and clients, because this approach that acknowledges the complex origins of obesity as a disease and other food-related ill health means that, we won't get into a situation where there's a kind of a blameful conversation. So I think, and some of the listeners will be familiar from their training on a stigmatization of obesity, that this is a far more complex conversation that has to be had. So I think this acknowledgement of the food environment contributes to that whole area where we do better as health professionals in our conversation around food-related ill health in general. I think that, as Nora said, everyone listening here is also a citizen, and that, we have to demand something better from our food environment. I think for too long we've let others take control. And this is so important and so fundamental and has such an impact on people's social, mental, physical health as they go through their lifetime. I mean, we're, as you said at some point in the conversation, we're at a moment in time here. We can make a change. For too long we've been trying to encourage people to change their own eating behavior in this environment that doesn't actually allow anyone to change their eating behavior. So we can't continue, to beat our heads against that brick wall. All of this has to change.
And also just to say, for parents who are looking for more information about healthy food, I mean, I worked with you on the START campaign, but there's information on the Safefood website about that as well, isn't there?
Yes, there is. So, we worked on the START campaign for 5 years, and we developed lots of resources and assets to support people in their own attempts to eat healthily. Now, this whole conversation has been around acknowledging how difficult that is. But just to remind people that those are still there. If people are looking for assistance with their healthy eating, they can go to safefood.net and they'll find lots of resources for parents there.
Great. And finally, can I put you on the spot and ask, looking forward 5 years from now, what would you like to see have happened?
5 years is a short period of time in these kinds of campaigns that require such change. And I suppose people listening may already be thinking about the parallels with the tobacco industry, where we banned advertising and then we banned it from the workplace with the protection of workers' rights at the centre of that. Now we're talking about children's rights and the protection of children. So those parallels are there. And then we moved cigarettes from visible places within shops so that you have to ask for them. And some of what Nora has alluded to is that restructuring of the retail environment where it's harder to get or to see or to be bombarded with these unhealthy foods. So in 5 years' time, I think the retail environment could be a really important part of this. And I think the fact that legislation has already come in England and may, stretch to cover other areas within the United Kingdom, I would love to see that kind of legislation coming in here within 5 years. I think that would be a legacy we could be proud of.
And Nora, could I ask you the same question?
All of that, plus in 5 or 10 years' time, Eamon, I want my children to be living in a country where we have a food culture. And by that, I mean that our food culture today in Ireland, for the majority, is a commercial corporate food culture masquerading as some sort of authentic thing that we do. OECD about a month ago produced a report of how long we spend at dinner. So how much time we actually spend at dinner. And you have countries that people love traveling to: France, Italy, Greece, kind of places where you go and you love this feeling of slow food, of whiling away the hours. And down at the bottom are countries like England, Ireland, and the United States. So we spend very little time eating. I will do it today. I will eat a box sandwich in front of a computer. And so in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, a food culture is when we will have structurally enough time to spend eating. So time is very fundamental to it. We will have no other choice but to relocalize our supply chains. We will not be able to rely on these long, complicated food chains anymore. We will live in a country where everyone will have a chance to experiment and become more experimental with the food they eat, because they will be exposed to Nigerian food, Indonesian food, Chinese food that are so much part of our kind of new communities now. So it's food isn't fuel. It's not food is not nutrition. Food is a psychosocial bond between human beings. And we have changed it into very fuel-led, very short-term highs for a lot of environmental and health expense. So what I want to see is Ireland living in a real food culture that's our own, that we own, and that corporations don't.
That was a lovely way to end this podcast. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Aileen McGlone and Nora Campbell. To all our listeners, thank you for your continued support, and please share this episode. If you would like more information about HSE Health and Wellbeing, follow us on X, or take a look at our Health and Wellbeing YouTube channel, or register for our e-zine by emailing healthandwellbeing.communications@hse.ie. This has been the HSE Health and Wellbeing podcast. Thank you for listening.